Let's look at self-justification and specifically at cognitive dissonance and see how these concepts relate to organizational ethics. What do we mean by self-justification? As humans, we want to maintain our sense of self-worth, our self-esteem, and we want others to think highly of us too. We want to think highly of ourselves, and we want others to think highly of us too. We want to be viewed by ourselves and by others as competent, smart, caring, valuable, and ethical. All these things, all humans want to be viewed that way, and they want to believe that they themselves are competent, smart, and caring, and valuable, and ethical. But this tendency to want to believe these things can have some negative effects when we fall short of this, when we aren't competent, when we don't do something that's very smart, when we're uncaring, when we're costly to others, and when we do something unethical. We don't want to admit these things about us. So this makes it difficult for us to take responsibility for our mistakes, failures, and unethical decisions. We don't want to say it's because of a choice that I made. We want to blame it on the circumstances or on other people or somehow justify our behavior so that we don't look incompetent. And so this is what we mean by self-justification. And there's several phenomena that occur that we find in our lives that lead to self-justification. One of these is cognitive dissonance. Now, cognitive means that it happens in our brain, so it has to do with our thoughts and our feelings. And dissonance means that something doesn't match up. They're in contradiction. And sometimes our thoughts and our feelings don't match up. Sometimes our thoughts and feelings don't match up with each other, and sometimes our thoughts and feelings don't match up with our behavior. Now, when this happens, this makes us feel uncomfortable because this self-contradiction that we have in us, oh, I believe this, but I'm actually doing this. I feel this, but my behavior says that I'm doing this. This self-contradiction makes us feel bad because it makes us seem even less competent. And this can cause our self-esteem to go down. We feel bad about these contradictions in us. And this feeling, this bad feeling that we have when things inside of us don't line up, is called cognitive dissonance. And so when we have this bad feeling of cognitive dissonance motivates us to change either our thoughts or our behaviors to make them more congruent with each other. And so that's how cognitive dissonance can affect what we do, because we will change them to make everything fit together. Now, sometimes this change may be in an ethical direction. Sometimes it may be in an unethical direction. Let's take some examples. Let's start often with the Ben Franklin effect. So Ben Franklin, one of the founding fathers of America in the 1700s, a newspaper editor and a scientist, he wrote about this phenomena that he had discovered where he could, if there was someone that disliked him, if he had somebody who considered him an enemy, if he wanted to make friends with them, what he would do is he would find out what books they had, and then he would go over to their place and ask to borrow their book. Now, it turns out that most people, when you ask them for a favor, they want to be viewed as generous, so they'll let you do it. So he was able to borrow books from the people that didn't like him. Now, this creates cognitive dissonance in the person who lent the book to Ben Franklin. That person can think, I don't like Ben Franklin. But then the person thinks, I helped out Ben Franklin. He borrowed this book that I have. He values the same things that I have. He sees the same value in this book that I do. He valued my expertise. He knew that I had this book. And so there's some conflicting beliefs there's the not liking Ben Franklin, but then the person says, well, I helped Ben Franklin out, and he's got the same, he values the same things I do, and he recognizes my expertise. Ooh, sounds like I like Ben Franklin. So the person has cognitive dissonance and typically will change their beliefs to like Ben Franklin. And so that's a phenomena that we can use also, and I think that's more or less ethical to, because it does demonstrate trust in our part and valuing them as a person. If somebody dislikes them, ask them to borrow something that you know that they have, and that demonstrates that you value the same thing that they do, that you recognize their value and their expertise, and if they help you out, they're probably going to have trouble keeping that idea together that they don't like you. So that's the Ben Franklin example, the Ben Franklin effect. Now let's look at some less positive examples of cognitive dissonance. One is humiliating team building events. A lot of times in organizations there are just some dumb activities that are supposed to build a team. Humiliating experiences where you pass a person around on everybody's shoulders, or some game where you say some strange things that have occurred in your life or whatever. And often these team building experiences are quite humiliating. Now, why in the world would somebody pay a consultant to come in and do some really lame team building events that humiliate people? Well, it creates cognitive dissonance. It's like, well, I don't really like the team members that I'm on, but I just voluntarily humiliated myself, so maybe I do like my team members. Or I just paid a lot of money for a consultant who had us do some really painful things. It must have been worth it. And it actually might not have helped communication at all, and studies show that an awful lot of these team building events do absolutely nothing. But we have cognitive dissonance saying, whoa, I humiliated myself and I didn't get anything out of it. That creates cognitive dissonance. So I say, okay, I humiliated myself, I must have gotten something out of it. It must have been worth it. And so it was good to have this team building experience, and that reduces our cognitive dissonance. It doesn't accomplish anything to make better teams. Generally, what teams need are better leadership, and books like Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team will describe in far superior ways how to get teams back on track compared to doing humiliating games with an outside consultant. Now let's take another example. Working with a subordinate who is more competent than I am. If I'm the supervisor and I hire somebody and that person turns out to be more competent than I am, that can cause some cognitive dissonance. I might be thinking, oh, I'm the supervisor, I'm supposed to be better than that person, but that person appears to be better. Uh-oh, something is not right. Now, the person can resolve it positively by supporting the subordinate and not feeling threatened and saying, oh, we've got complementary gifts and experiences, and I want to do everything I can to see this person succeed. Or the person can feel threatened and think, ooh, I'm supposed to be in charge, but this person is more competent. And decide that that person needs to leave the company and fire that person because that person is making them feel bad, therefore they must be incompetent, even though they have evidence that says that they are competent. Now, these kind of things, that can relieve the cognitive dissonance of the supervisor, but sometimes the cognitive dissonance that somebody feels, if they have power, they can spread it onto other people. So maybe the supervisor wants to get rid of this person that's very competent because they feel threatened, so they contact HR, human resources, and say that they want this person fired for insubordination. But they can't really provide any examples of insubordination. So now the HR person starts experiencing cognitive dissonance. Oh, I'm supposed to do what this manager says because that's my job, but I don't have any evidence that this person actually should be fired. What do? If I do what's honest, I'll tell the manager that there's no justification for it, but that might cost me my position, or he'll talk to my boss and I might not get the promotion. So that can create all kinds of cognitive dissonance in the HR person. And the HR person has to decide, do they want to be consistent and only do what's ethically right? Or do they want to say, well, the manager must know something that I don't, so this person does decide to be fired. And that would resolve the cognitive dissonance also in an unethical way. Now, there's some other examples of unethical behavior that can result from cognitive dissonance. One has to do with the idea of what I call pseudo-catharsis. Freud had this idea that we need to get mad, we need to get it out of our system, we need to blow up occasionally at people, and that will calm us down and help us have a better relationship with them and a better relationship with ourselves. Well, it turns out when you actually measure things like that, it doesn't happen. If one vents one's anger and explodes at somebody, it's going to tend to make that person even more angry at the person rather than some type of catharsis that calms them down. So if I get mad and yell at a subordinate, I need to justify my aggression and hurtful behavior, so I will convince myself that the other person deserved it in order to reduce the cognitive dissonance. And so that just gives me more reasons to keep on getting mad at that person, which are completely illegitimate. So this is an example of how cognitive dissonance can again lead to unethical behavior. Now, from a Christian point of view, this cognitive dissonance leads to some interesting questions. One is, as a Christian, where does our self-worth come from? Does our self-worth come from appearing competent, having other people think that we're competent? Or does our self-worth come from what Jesus Christ has done on the cross for us? As Christians, one of the most fundamental ideas in the gospel is that humans are sinful and guilty, and we're not competent to stand before God in our own goodness and righteousness. And we need to be forgiven by God. We can't self-justify. We need the justification that comes from God. And that's why he sent Jesus Christ to die on the cross for us. In fact, this process of salvation is called sometimes justification. God made us. He forgives us of our sins and removes the consequences. Jesus received the penalty in his own body on the cross for our sins, and our identity now is found in what Christ has done. My self-worth doesn't depend on how good I am. I still want to do a good job and everything, and I want to glorify God with every opportunity he gives me, but I know that my worth comes from God and not myself, so I don't have to fake myself out. I don't have to try to blind other people. I don't have to try to blame other people. I can just humbly come before God and before others and saying that I know I'm not as good as I am, but by the grace of God, I hope I can do better next time.